One night in 1176, the most powerful man in the Muslim world wakes in his own tent and cannot breathe. Saladin, the sultan who has united Egypt and Syria and terrifies the Crusader kingdoms, is camped in the heart of his own army, ringed by thousands of loyal soldiers. Yet on the ground beside his head sits a dagger that was not there when he fell asleep, pinning a note that promises the next blade will find his throat. Someone walked past every guard, into the tent of the best protected man alive, and chose to leave a warning instead of a corpse. Saladin has faced armies and never blinked. This unmans him completely. Within days, he abandons his campaign against the mountain sect that sent the message and makes peace, and he never moves against them again. For the better part of 2 centuries, this is the power a small band of outcasts holds over kings, caliphs, and crusaders. They cannot win a single open battle. They do not need to. They have a mountain, an idea, and a single perfectly placed knife, the outcast preacher. The man who built this weapon is a Persian named Hassan-i-Saba. He lives in a world ruled by the Seljuk Turks, a vast Sunni empire that stretches across Persia and beyond. And he belongs to the Ismailis, a hunted branch of Shia Islam, far too few in number to fight that empire in the open. Hassan is no ordinary believer. He is brilliant, austere, and utterly certain, a trained missionary who has traveled all the way to the Ismaili court in Egypt and returned home burning to carve out a base of power in hostile land. He does the sums that every rebel before him got wrong. He will never raise an army large enough to beat the Seljuks on a battlefield, and any fortress he holds by force can be starved out and stormed. So he decides not to fight the empire's strength at all. He decides to fight its handful of irreplaceable men, the Eagle's Nest. In 1090, Hassan seizes the fortress of Alamut, perched on a narrow crag high in the Alborz mountains of northern Persia, a place so remote and so sheer that an army can barely climb to its gates, let alone break them. He does not take it by siege, he takes it by patience, slipping his followers inside and converting the garrison from within until the castle is simply his, without a battle fought. From this eyrie he spins a web of mountain strongholds across the country, each one a fortress no ruler can easily reach. He fills Alamut with workshops, scholars, and a great library. And then he does something almost unbelievable for a man who will hold an empire hostage. He barely ever leaves. For the last 3 decades of his life he reportedly steps outside his own quarters only a handful of times, governing a reign of terror that spans hundreds of miles from a single stone room. And inside those walls he trains the weapon that will make his name a whisper of dread. His followers call them the Fida'in, those who sacrifice themselves, the single dagger. The Fida'in are young devotees schooled in disguise, languages, patience, and an obedience that does not flinch at death. Hassan's method is cold and revolutionary. When a general or a governor or a great vizier threatens the sect, he does not send an army. He sends one man to remove that single person, and he has it done in the most public way imaginable, in a crowded mosque on a Friday, in the middle of a court, with a plain dagger. The killer usually makes no attempt to flee. He wants to be caught because the point is not merely to kill, but to be seen killing, to prove to every powerful man watching that no wall, no guard, and no crowd can keep him safe. In 1092, a Fidai disguised as a wandering holy man buries a knife in Nizam al-Mulk, the most powerful vizier of the entire Seljuk Empire and one of the finest statesmen of the age, It is a declaration of war on the whole established order, and it lands like a thunderclap. Across the east, sultans and princes begin to wear armor beneath their robes and sleep behind bolted doors. Hassan holds his own people to the same merciless code that he turns on his enemies. When one of his sons is accused of ordering a killing without leave, he has the boy put to death. When his other son breaks the law by drinking wine, he executes him too. Not even his own blood stands above the rule, the old man of the mountain. The sect spreads west into the mountains of Syria, straight into the path of the Crusades, and there its leaders acquire a name that will haunt European imagination for centuries, the old man of the mountain. Around that name, the legend grows monstrous and irresistible. Crusaders and travelers carry home a story that the old man keeps a hidden garden paradise, that he drugs his young recruits with hashish and lets them wake among wine, honey, and beautiful companions, so they believe they have glimpsed heaven itself, and that he then promises they may return there forever if they die obeying his commands. It is almost certainly invention, a tale spun by frightened enemies to explain a devotion they could not otherwise understand. And the mocking word they hurled at the sect, hashishin, will pass into European tongues as a brand new word for a hired killer, assassin. The garden may be a fable, but the fear is entirely real. Under a cunning Syrian leader named Sinan, the sect plays the great powers against each other with nothing but the promise of the knife. It comes within a breath of killing Saladin more than once, until that dagger in the night persuades him to choose peace over pride. And in 1192, on the streets of Tyre, two assassins disguised as Christian monks cut down Conrad of Montferrat, the man just chosen to be king of Jerusalem, plunging the Crusader states into chaos and mutual suspicion over who had paid for the blow. The mountain falls. For more than a century and a half, the sect outlasts everything sent against it, shielded by its cliffs and its terrible reputation. Then, in the middle of the 1200s, a power arrives that fears neither. The Mongols, led by Hulagu, a grandson of Genghis Khan, pour into Persia with siege engines and a flood of soldiers, unlike anything the region has ever faced. Reputation. The Mongols tear the strongholds apart, put the community to the sword, and burn the famous library, and much of what the sect ever knew of itself disappears forever into the fire. A few years later, the Mamluk Sultan Baybars finishes the task in Syria, grinding the last old men of the mountain down into obedient vassals. The knife that had held kings at their own throats for generations finally falls silent. Almost everything the world thinks it knows about the assassins comes from the people who hated and feared them. The Sunni chroniclers who despised their creed, the Crusaders who dreaded their reach, and Marco Polo, who carried the tale of the drugged paradise back to Europe long after the last fortress had fallen. Strip the legend away, and what is left is stranger and far more modern than the myth. A tiny, cornered minority, unable to raise an army or win a battle, invented a form of warfare built on precision, patience, and pure psychological terror, and with it held the mightiest men of the age hostage for the better part of 200 years. And their story does not end in the rubble of Alamut. The Nizari Ismailis were never wiped from the earth. They survived, scattered and quiet, and today they number in the millions, a peaceful global community led by a living spiritual leader, the Aga Khan, known now not for the dagger, but for their schools, their hospitals, and their charity. The sect that once terrified kings outlived every king who tried to destroy it. The world chose to remember the legend of the killers in the garden. The truth was a faith that simply refused to die.